Hey, everybody, it's David Kemp, host of Highway to Health podcast. We are squarely in the middle of November or Movember, if you can't tell by this bad facial hair that I have. And we're glad that you're here. Hope you are getting ready to enjoy the holidays. Before you go, we've got a special conversation to share with you today. It's the CEO of Rani Therapeutics, Talat Imran, and they are on a mission to improve patient outcomes and patient experiences, just the kind of companies and people that we appreciate on this show. And I'm honored to have you here. Talat, welcome to Highway to Health.
Thank you, David, for the time. First off, you're rocking that mustache. I'm totally jealous. Mine is just nothing by comparison. So yeah, wear it with pride.
Well, I try. It's about this time of the month every year that I start to think about shaving it, but I've got to push through and see it to the end.
It's got like a Dr. Watson vibe to it. I like
it. It's pretty bad, but hey, once a year we can handle it. My wife, she's a saint for letting me do it.
Good sport. Right?
Yeah, good sport is right. Well, we can't thank you enough for being here. We're honored to have you on, and tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll get into work here in a minute, but share with us a little bit about your background. It's truly an inspiring story. And so share a little bit about yourself and your family, and then we'll get into Rani here in just a minute.
Sure. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Palo Alto to be precise. Grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My dad is a very well-known medical device inventor and innovator. He developed the first implantable defibrillator, and he's built and sold a dozen companies in the medtech space. I grew up around that sort of ethos and even around the companies. He had me work at his businesses, answering phones from when I was 12. I think there's probably some child labor violations somewhere along the way there, but we won't talk about that. But it was incredible. It was an incredible education for me, right? To be able to apprentice basically around these businesses for decades before I was an adult and, getting into business myself. I studied computer science in college, and then I went directly into venture capital when I started my career. I was most recently a partner at a couple of venture funds in the medtech and biotech spaces. And at Rani Therapeutics, the company that I'm now CEO of, I was previously head of strategy, helped raise some of the private capital for the business, and then became CEO last year in the spring, and we took the company public in July of 21, that is.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the success. I love hearing about, what's made you who you are today. And I think almost all of us can point to a family member, a person in our lives that has been so instrumental. For me, it was my dad too. He's a military guy, very disciplined, hardworking guy. And I grew up watching him just do it every day and bring consistency to his effort. And that molded me. And how cool that you got to spend that time with your dad and see all the awesome things that he was doing, all the innovations that he was a part of. And then it's really awesome that he included you throughout the process too.
Well, that word discipline really resonates with me. I think that was what he was trying to instill in me from a young age. This notion, I remember in doing math problems and bringing home math homework, and he would say, okay, those are the ones they assigned, but there are all these other problems in the book. Do 100 of them. Don't do 5 or 10 or whatever the minimum requirement is. And it isn't about genius or some special talent. It's just about putting in the work and having discipline. I think that's what really leads to success. I
couldn't agree more. And doing it and then doing it again and continue doing it until the job gets done.
Do it whether you feel good, whether you feel bad, whether it's going well, whether it's not. Just keep doing it, and you're going to progress over time.
I mean, we owe so much to our parents.
Yes.
And I'm hoping, I've got 4 little ones at the house now, and I'm hoping that I'm carrying on that tradition as much as I can. About through my example, but also through the words and my mentorship and training that I'm trying my best to provide, and only time will tell.
No, that's wonderful. I try to do the same. I have a daughter. She's 11 now, And I used to travel to Asia quite a bit, and to China in particular. And she is in a Chinese immersion school. So I brought her on some of my business trips. She sat in on meetings. She translated for me. She
Holy
comes to the
cow.
office every now and again when she has a day off. So I'm not breaking any child labor laws, but hopefully giving her some valuable experiences.
That's great. And just the time away with you and her,
Yeah,
to spend together is special. So very
absolutely.
cool. Very cool. And, that's led you to really successful, productive adulthood, and leads us to our conversation around Rani. Rani is, we started this show, this Highway to Health podcast series, because there is such great innovation going on in the healthcare space, really in every subvertical of healthcare. And when you talk to people around healthcare, sometimes you get this negative perception or opinion about, how slowly healthcare evolves. And that's one of the reasons why I started Highway to Health, is because there's some great stuff going on in healthcare. If you look back 10 years ago, we were light years away from some of the things that we're doing now. So the speed of innovation has been incredible, and we've made real progress. If you look 10 years down the road into the future, there's no limit to what could be accomplished. And so I'd like to start addressing some of those negative opinions and perceptions, because there's great work being done here. And Rani Therapeutics is a great example of that. Give us a high-level summary about Rani Therapeutics, the challenges that you set out to, overcome, and where we are in that journey.
Yeah, happy to, but I want to challenge that perception that things are taking too long before I jump into it. I think we live in a golden age of healthcare and biotech. I think we'll look back 50, 70 years from now, and many of us will be alive because of the technologies and innovations that are happening right now. And look at this time and say, wow, it was the pace of innovation and the rate of change went up so dramatically, akin to maybe the 80s and 90s with computing, right? And I say that because, taking one small example, the COVID vaccine, an mRNA vaccine being developed in less than a year, where if you look at polio vaccines and every other category of infectious disease, they took decades. The modalities that are coming into the market, whether it's mRNA, talking about the COVID vaccine, antisense oligonucleotides, peptides and antibodies have proliferated and changed the disease progression for patients with rheumatoid arthritis, with psoriasis, with Crohn's disease and the like. And then oncology, immuno-oncology drugs, CAR T, cell therapy, gene therapy, CRISPR, these are going to literally cure diseases that have been death sentences or major pain points in terms of quality of life for millions of patients. So we're right at that precipice, and things move as fast as they can safely. Right. And Rani is, I think, one of those really interesting things that people have been trying for 50 years to take these biologics, the ones that I just mentioned, and turn them into pills. Tons of approaches. We primarily for the smallest of biologics, short peptides, where you add excipients, additives to the drug to try to enhance absorption. The challenge you run into is that our gut evolved to break down biologic material and turn it into nutrition, into food, right? So that you don't, as an example, absorb a virus through your gut. It's right. Very good at doing so. And so these technologies that preceded us just didn't work very well, almost no absorption. And as I mentioned, they didn't work at all if you were trying a large protein, a monoclonal antibody, or some of these more novel biologic modalities. What we've developed is essentially a swallowable autoinjector. So it looks like a regular pill. Patient swallows it. It has a protective coating that keeps it from dissolving in the acidic environment of the stomach. And when it gets to the small intestines, the capsule dissolves, and there's a self-inflating balloon that opens up, inflates, and a syringe inside the balloon injects into the intestinal wall and delivers the drug. The reason we do this is there are no sharp pain receptors in the gut, and so this is a pain-free injection. And now we've conducted 2 clinical studies. We've demonstrated that it's pain-free. And since it's an injection, we're getting absorption rates that rival what you get from a subcutaneous injection in your arm. And it works whether it's a peptide, an antibody, a large protein. It's completely agnostic to what you put in.
So in my mind, you've already addressed the first question or concern that I had, which was around the pain, right? If we're injecting things into the intestinal wall, what does that feel like for the patient? What's that experience?
It's painless. They don't even know it's happening.
That's incredible. The next thing where my mind goes to next is, okay, so what could we address with this new technology? What current health afflictions could we start treating with this new therapy? Is it diabetes? You mentioned some vaccines earlier. What are some things that we could start helping patients with right away? Where does your mind go? What kind of clinical situations or infections are you trying to address with this oral pill?
So we're mostly focused on chronic diseases. And to give a little context here, there are certain kinds of innovations, disruptive innovations, I think Rani falls into that category, that come out of nowhere. The invention of the airplane or the automobile, there's no precedent before that. What Rani's doing is a little different. This is more akin to an iPhone or a Tesla, where people had phones before. That was already a large and established market. People drove cars before electric EVs came onto the market. So you're bringing a new technology and a significantly better technology into a market that was already large and robust. And that's what's happening here. So to answer your question, there are so many places you can take this. Cardiometabolic disease, diabetes, as you mentioned. All the immunology, autoimmune diseases, because biologics are being used everywhere now. So psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, osteoporosis, that's the clinical study RT102 program that we conducted this year and shared data from. Eventually, we want to do work in oncology. There's a real potential there, we think, to use Rani pills with more frequent dosing to perhaps get better efficacy out of the same drugs that are being given more infrequently now. And then you get into rare diseases that afflict small numbers of patients, but they're completely tethered to their therapies. They have to get IV infusions, go to a clinic every single week for the rest of their lives. If we can take those and turn them into pills that you can take at home, that could be transformative for those patients.
Absolutely. Especially for those patients that it's not as convenient to get into a facility, like our rural population.
Without a doubt, this is something that's so important to us. And I think it was really highlighted for everyone because of COVID, where now no one wanted to go out of the house for a period. We were all locked down. And how do you go and get an IV infusion? So a lot of those patients and a lot of those drugs suffered in terms of their use because it's of the delivery mechanism. And we would make that so much simpler to deliver and to distribute.
Now tell us a little bit about the frequency of dosage and the benefits of doing these micro dosings more often compared to once a week or even bi-weekly or once a month dosing for let's say cancer or another chronic disease that you've mentioned. What's the benefit to the patient by doing it more often and in smaller amounts?
Yeah, this is a great question, and we still have to prove this out, but there's precedent for it. I think the history here is important. Pharma companies formulate the dosing schedules for biologics to have as infrequent injections as possible because they know their patients don't like injecting themselves.
Right.
The problem with that is you start with a much bigger dose so that the peak is high, so that by the end, when the drug is wearing off, you're still at a therapeutic level, right? But and the wider the gap between doses, the bigger that we call it peak to trough variability is. If you go to a daily dose administration, you can titrate much more tightly. So if you want a higher concentration for better efficacy or a lower concentration so that you have fewer side effects, if you move to a daily dose from a once a month or once every 3 months or once every 2 weeks, there's a potential to show superiority on those safety and tolerability and efficacy measurements. And we're not the first to demonstrate this. We need to do that work, but there have been other companies that have made drugs more frequently injected and shown that they are superior.
So you're talking about a better experience on the front end, right? Instead of injecting yourself or going to a facility for treatment or therapy, it's painless. It's just like swallowing a normal pill, so you don't feel the actual infusion. And then because you're doing it more often, the side effects of the treatment or the therapy are lessened. That's incredible. Could be, like you said, could be transformative for our population, our healthcare industry. You talked about something earlier though about the biology of our bodies and how we've in the past we've tried this, but our body has fought against this natural process. Go a little bit deeper in terms of the science behind Rani and how you're using that natural biology of a human to your advantage.
Sure. So as I mentioned, the technologies that preceded us were trying to address the response, if you will, of our gut to the presence of biologic material. So the gut is where we absorb nutrients. It's where we eat food and it's broken down, and it's very good at doing so. So the approaches before us would add enzyme blockers, protease inhibitors, mucus denuders. They would remove all the mucosal lining from the intestines. That's pretty harsh. And then there are some permeation enhancers, which try to open up little ports to get some absorption. But it's highly variable, and it only works for the smallest of biologics, which represent a very small portion of the actual biologics that are commercially used now, that are used in the clinic. Our approach was to say, okay, stop fighting biology, work with it. And we knew that there were no sharp pain receptors in the gut. And that's because going back, looking at our evolution, not just us, but mammals in general, we eat twigs and berries, fish with whole bones in them, and they go through and they poke your intestines, and you don't feel a thing for a good reason because there's nothing you can do about it. And the intestines are primitive and very quick to repair. So as an example, cancer patients that have feeding tubes inserted, when they're removed, the hole is as big as your pinky. It's not even sutured up. It'll close up within 24 to 36 hours on its own.
Wow.
So it's a very tolerant organ to insult. And so we took advantage of that. And on top of it, it's where we evolved to absorb nutrients. So it's highly vascularized. There's this capillary bed all around the intestines. So if you can get past this defense mechanism it has to biologic material, which we bypass it by just injecting through, then you can get faster absorption potentially and more efficient absorption. And now we've been able to demonstrate that both preclinically and in the clinic with certain drugs.
Which then leads to that smaller dose of the medicine that you need to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then you do it every day or more often so that you maintain this level of stability as a patient.
And that's another really important point, because adherence to drugs is always a challenge. And Rani isn't completely solving that. Adherence is better potentially with an oral, with a pill versus an injectable, but it's not perfect. But with these drugs that have long half-lives that stay around for several days or a couple of weeks, if you take fractional microdoses, as you put it, on a daily basis, even if you forget to take a pill, the penalty isn't that big. Whereas if you're taking a drug that has to be injected once every 3 months and you put it off by a couple of weeks, you're just out of therapy. And in some of them, they require loading doses. So you may never get back to the level that you need, or you may need to go back and get a loading dose. Your doctor doesn't know that. It cascades through a lot of problems. Whereas in this, it gives you much more margin for error, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, that's just incredibly logical. I would much rather, take a vitamin orally than give myself a shot every day. And so that it doesn't solve it, right? I mean, we're all forgetful and we get busy, but it does make it easier on the patient. There's no doubt about that. I think that's completely logical. So where are you in this journey of bringing this solution to market and to the general population?
So Rani is a 10-year-old company. We spent the first 7 years developing the technology. As you can imagine, it's easy to understand the impact, the potential, and maybe even to explain how it works, but it's incredibly difficult to actually make something like this, right? That's why we're kind of an N of one. But since then, we've gone into the clinic. We did a phase 1 study with octreotide for rare disease called acromegaly in 2019. And then this year, we ran our second phase 1 study with teriparatide or PTH1 through 34 for the treatment of osteoporosis. It's a really interesting drug. It's one of the best drugs in that category. Osteoporosis is a disease of bone loss. It's kind of a silent disease. You lose bone over time, particularly in elderly women. And then there's a fracture, and those fractures often are fatal in women in their 70s and 80s. There are drugs on the market that are anti-resorptive that help you. I call them the Rogaine of osteoporosis treatment, keep what you got kind of thing. Yeah. But then there are osteoanabolic drugs, bone building drugs like teriparatide that are great. They really should be given to everyone or anyone with moderate to severe osteoporosis. There's 3 million women in that category in the US alone. Wow. But there's maybe 50 or 60,000 women taking teriparatide. And you may ask why, and that's because it's a hormone, you need a pulse, and so it has to be injected every single day. Wow. So the only patients who really get it are patients who are post-fractures. I'd even point out there are 1.5 million osteoporotic fractures in the US every year alone. And again, there's maybe 50, 60,000 women on these drugs. You can't take an anti-resorptive treatment if you've already had a fracture. You need to grow bone. And so turning this into a pill, making it potentially available to more patients, allowing them to take it earlier. This is something we haven't talked about. When do you prescribe these drugs? Do you wait till somebody's really sick, or do you give it to them when they're still healthy enough that it could bend the progression of their disease? There's lots of data on this, but it's hard to get sick people to take an injectable, let alone people who are maybe either pre-diabetic or mild to moderate osteoporosis. We think we could have a dramatic impact there if you could turn them into pills.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on this show about earlier detection or earlier therapies to use your term, to bend that curve and prevent, a larger health event, a larger healthcare episode. And that's interesting. I hadn't thought of, this type of therapy in that way or being beneficial in that way. So you've done some clinical trials, right? And you're working through this process. Give us, we talked earlier about, how much innovation we've seen over the last 10 years and what's brought us to this golden era in healthcare in terms of technology advancements, therapy advancements. Give us a preview of, 5 years, 10 years from now, what we could have available to us in terms of treatments and therapies for some of these chronic diseases.
From Rani in particular, or the market in general?
Let's do the market in general.
Sure. So I think with CRISPR gene editing, you can see the clinical trials that are ongoing. Some of them will reach registration and get approval in the next 5 years. And so there are certain diseases where you would have a functional cure, right? And that's going to be incredibly exciting. Those technologies are still nascent, and there's some variability that's been shown in the clinical studies. So, but I think that the technology, the delivery mechanisms will get better over time, and the effects will be more durable. There are, I believe, 4,000 single gene mutation diseases that can be affected by CRISPR. So that's just a huge area over the next, call it 50 years, that's going to be plumbed, and hopefully a number of these diseases will become relics of history. In the chronic disease space, I think you have to look at what Rani's doing, because there's a lot of effective treatments. You go category by category. I've mentioned these: psoriasis. The drugs in that space are just so effective already, the injectable drugs, that is. But it's limited who can get access to them, how easy or convenient is it to take them. My sister just went on one for her. She has an immune disorder, and she's on Dupixent, and it's life-changing. It's really helped her. But the burden of that injection is now a very personal thing. I've had to inject her. My dad has had to. She just went back to grad school. And it's become something that her life, I don't want to say revolves around, but it's something that she has to think about. She had to stay closer to campus in case she needs to get another injection. Right? These are things that are, we can affect that in a very positive way with a Rani pill.
Sure. I loved your analogy earlier about the Tesla compared to the, traditional vehicle, or the iPhone compared to the traditional mobile phone. With that in mind, though, and those companies had some challenges early on too. With innovation comes skepticism, and For us as a healthcare industry to get where we want to go, not only do we need disruption and advancements in technology, we need early adopters. Mm-hmm. We need people that are willing to try new things. How are you educating, or how do you plan to educate the providers and the patients on the benefits of an oral pill like Rani, and maybe overcome some of the skepticism around, well, am I really going to fill it? What's that experience really going to be like? How do you plan to educate? How important is education to the provider and the patient community?
That's no one's ever asked me that. It's a great question, because we deal with skepticism all the time. We've been dealing with it for 10 years. If you go to RaniTherapeutics.com, watch the animation, you can see what I described. It looks like science fiction. It looks like a moonshot every time it happens, and it really is, but it works. This is one of those cases where we've put in the work and made a real product. When we started, there were pharma companies that said to us, "You'll never be able to make a microtablet out of a biologic. You'll destroy the drug in the process, or you'll never be able to do this reliably." Or patients actually like taking injections. It's more convenient to take fewer injections. I've heard that from more than one pharma company. They've convinced themselves of that because there's no alternative, so they can believe it. Well, they can choose to believe it, if you will. That one always irked me. And so we ran a market research survey. We asked hundreds of patients across multiple biologics, would you rather take a pill every day than your current injection? There's one drug, Prolia, which is injected once every 6 months. 76% of those patients said they'd rather take a pill every day, 365 pills in a year, as opposed to 2 injections per year.
Wow.
So, that's all the skepticism we've dealt with up until this point. At this point, though, we've done 2 clinical studies. We've demonstrated that it works. We've published clinical papers on this. And the skepticism in the pharma community is going away. The amount of inbound we get, the interest around putting their programs on a Rani pill it's gone from a trickle to a deluge in the last year, and because of this clinical data. On the patient side, I'm just not that worried about it. I think that if anything, patients are going to be our biggest advocates. When I speak to patients on an individual level, and there's so many people, there are millions of people with chronic diseases. Almost everyone you meet it's either them or one of their loved ones that suffers from one of these diseases.
No doubt.
Everyone brings up the burden of the injections that they have to take. So the last one are the payers. And our strategy there has been to take drugs that are already approved, one, because we're not layering drug risk on top of the platform, but also because they're already priced, right? These are well characterized in the market. And our goal is as broad adoption as possible. So we'll price at parity with the originators, with the products that are already there, and make it so it's an easy choice to switch over to a Rani.
At the core of this, you're just empowering patients to make a choice on how they would like to receive their care. And we've seen this trend in the rise in healthcare services being rendered at the home, because the patient oftentimes would rather be taken care of at their house. So the rise in that type of experience was patient driven. And it's just giving them a choice, right? An option, empowering them with different choices. Rani is similar in that way, where you're not trying to discredit infusions. What you're trying to do is give the patient an option. If this is prohibiting you of taking the medicine that you need to have the experience that you need to have the quality of life that you need, here's another option, and maybe it's better for you. And that, I think, at its core, when you look at it that way, the education is simple. We're just empowering patients and providers with new options.
Yeah, and I think the analogy and the context you just gave is really relevant. There has been a push to move these infusions and things into the home to make it more convenient. But and Rani's maybe the logical conclusion of that, because there's nothing easier than taking a pill at your home.
No doubt.
My head of HR, her daughter is a nurse. She just got her nursing license, and her first job, she was telling me, is going and doing these infusions, just what we're talking about. And I thought about it. It's something that scales with people, right? You're only going to be able to do as many of those as you have nurses to go and administer them. Whereas if you move it to a pill, it's one-to-one with the patients. Every patient can take a pill themselves. You don't need a provider to come. It can, for the payers, it lowers the costs of delivering these therapies. So there are a lot of benefits, and it also untethers you from your life revolving around that infusion. If you have to get that infusion every week, it means you're not traveling, right? You may not be able to go see your grandkids, right? Or if you do, now it becomes a big production and you have to find a local infusion center, you have to schedule it. Whereas if you have pills, you put them in your purse, you put them in your bag, you take them with you, and you get to live your life. Because ultimately, healthcare is so essential, because when you don't have health, that's all you can focus on. Mm-hmm. But the goal is to make people healthy enough so they can focus on the things that they love, right? The people, the experiences, the work, their passions, whatever it is.
That's really well said. If there's one thing that you wanted our listeners to walk away understanding, what would that be?
That this is real. What Rani Therapeutics is doing is delivering this promise, this hope that people have had and companies have attempted to deliver on for, no pun intended, for 5 decades now, really going back to the 1920s when insulin was first discovered. But we've demonstrated that this works. We've demonstrated repeatedly. We've done it with 12 molecules now. And we just appreciate everyone's support as we continue this journey, help with the awareness of what we're doing. And hopefully we'll be able to bring it across the finish line once and then again with multiple drugs over the coming decade.
Well, that's my hope too. And that's my wish. And I can't thank you enough for being here. And when we look at healthcare in general, we talk about it taking a village, and you mentioned patients, providers, and payers. And when all those three come together with innovative solutions, early adoption of those solutions, we can really, truly change the experience and the outcomes of our population. And it's a lot. I can't thank you for what you're doing. I can't thank you enough for what you're doing in the healthcare industry. And we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. We all have to be partners in this. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our story, David. This was an absolute blast.
Same here. Have a good one.
Thank you.